The year was 1347, and for Europe it was going to be a summer to remember. But not in a good way. As the sun beat down on the bustling port of Messina, Sicily, a fleet of ships had just arrived, carrying exotic goods and weary travelers from distant lands along the famed Silk Road. These vessels were supposed to bring riches and trade to the prosperous Italian city, but instead, they brought something much more sinister. On board were fleas living on black rats, which carried with them a disease that would soon devastate entire populations. Wheat in weeks, these tiny carriers would unleash one of the most horrific plagues in human history upon Europe, killing millions and changing the course of world history forever. And what do you mean by change? I mean, whoa, it's me, and you're watching this channel. Join me and my trusty sidekick, Professor Kronos, as we travel through time to bring you the greatest hits of history. Now let's get back to those pesky fleas. They were small, incredibly resilient, and essentially vampires of the rodent world. These parasites thrived on the blood of their rat hosts, feasting on them during the day and then seeking refuge on their furry bodies at night. It was the perfect arrangement until it wasn't. See, as the ships carrying the infected rats arrived at Mediterranean ports, the fleas were exposed to a new environment, rats and humans, and when they couldn't find enough rats to feed on, they moved on to a secondary host, us, transferring the deadly disease from one victim to the next. But before we delve into the horrors of the plague itself, let's take a closer look at how these tiny terrors made their way to Europe. The journey began in Central Asia, likely somewhere in modern-day Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan. There, flea-infested black rats lived alongside humans and animals on the ships sailing along the Silk Road. Their job was simple: keep the rodents warm during the cold nights and ensure they could survive the journey. Unfortunately, they would also bring in a stowaway that would cause havoc in Europe. Historians believe that the plague originated in the mountains of Central Asia, possibly in the area around Lake Issyk. From here, it spread along the trade routes connecting China and Europe. The Mongols played a key role in its westward movement. As Genghis Khan and his successors forged a vast empire across Eurasia, they created a network of trade and communication that facilitated the spread of goods, ideas, and yes, diseases. While the Mongols brought prosperity and cultural exchange to many regions, they also inadvertently helped transmit deadly pathogens. This happened because the Mongols kept their animals close, sometimes even in their tents, allowing diseases to jump species and infect humans. By the mid-1300s, the plague had reached the Middle East and North Africa, causing sporadic outbreaks that devastated local populations. But the worst was yet to come. In 1346, Mongol forces attacked the Crimean Peninsula, bringing their animal companions with them, unknowingly carrying millions of plague bacteria in their wake. A few months later, some of those very same rats landed in Sicily. As trade continued, it brought in not only valuable goods and spices, but also a silent, invisible killer. The unsuspecting residents of Messina had no idea they were about to become ground zero for one of the deadliest plagues in history. Once ashore, the infected rats spread out across the city and beyond, leaving a trail of death and misery in their path. But it took a little time for the true horrors of the plague to unfold. Initially, the disease went unnoticed as people struggled to understand its mysterious symptoms. And while we now know that the plague was caused by bacteria, at the time, doctors had no clue what was happening. The first sign of infection was often painful swellings in the groin, armpits, or neck, which became known as bio. These bumps would grow and swell, becoming filled with pus and blood. The victims were in agony as they tried to understand why these painful lumps had suddenly appeared on their bones. It was a mystery that would confound physicians for years to come. As the plague progressed, other symptoms developed, including fever, chills, and vomiting. But perhaps the most chilling sign of all was the blackening of the skin. This horrifying symptom was caused by bleeding under the skin, which turned a sickly shade of purple or black, hence the name Black Death. It was a gruesome spectacle that struck terror into the hearts of those who witnessed it. And if you somehow survived the Black Death, congratulations. You won the plague lottery. However, surviving didn't mean you got off scot-free. Many survivors were left with permanent dark scars where the plague had ravaged their bodies, a haunting reminder of their brush with death. With such grim symptoms, You might think that the Black Death was a death sentence, and you'd be right. When someone came down with these symptoms, their chances of survival were slim to none. And let me tell you, the people of 14th century Europe weren't shy about sharing the blame for this deadly disease. At the time, the causes of illness were often misunderstood, leading to wild theories and accusations. Some blamed bad air, believing that full-smelling miasma or poisonous vapors were rising from the ground or decaying organic matter and infecting people. Others turned to astrology and astronomy, seeking answers in the positions of the stars and planets. Some pointed their fingers at God, believing that the plague was a punishment for humanity's sins. And sadly, others resorted to persecuting minority groups like Jews and foreigners, blaming them for spreading the disease. Even some Christians accused the devil himself of orchestrating this pestilence. But the truth was far more mundane and deadly than any of these theories. As the plague spread across Europe, whole towns and villages were being wiped out, leaving a trail of corpses in its wake. It seemed that nowhere was safe from this relentless killer. Yet even in the face of such devastation, people found ways to persevere. Survivors of the plague often faced discrimination and social stigma, as many believed that those who had recovered were immune to the disease and could spread it to others. Sadly, this wasn't always true. While some people did develop immunity after recovering from the plague, this was not universal, and many survivors continued to be vulnerable to infection. It was a scary thought that those who had survived once could fall victim again, adding to the fear and uncertainty surrounding the plague. Medical professionals at the time were baffled and desperate. They lacked the scientific knowledge to understand the true nature of the plague, leading to ineffective and sometimes harmful treatments. One popular method was bloodletting, the practice of removing blood from the body to balance its humors. Physicians believed that the plague was caused by an imbalance of these humors, so they used leeches, lancets, and cupping to drain their patients' blood. But instead of helping, this practice often made things worse. Another common treatment was the use of herbal potions and elixirs, which were supposed to ward off or cure the plague. Unfortunately, these remedies were usually ineffective and sometimes dangerous. Some herbs contained toxic substances that worsened the plague symptoms or interacted with other medications, leading to even more health complications. Let's go ahead and take a moment to appreciate just how devastating the plague was. Between 1347 and 1351, it is estimated that between 25 to 50 million people, almost one-third of Europe's population, perished from the disease. Entire towns and cities were decimated, with some losing up to 80% of their population. This staggering loss of life had profound consequences for European society. The sudden and massive decrease in population led to significant labor shortages, especially in the agricultural sector. With so many farmers and laborers dying, crops were left unplanted and the economy suffered. It was a crisis that shook the foundations of medieval society. This widespread death had a profound impact on art and literature of the time. Artists and writers began to reflect the darkness and despair that had descended upon Europe. One famous example is the Dance of Death, a recurring motif in art that depicted skeletons dancing with people from all walks of life, reminding viewers of the grim reality that no one was safe from the plague. The Black Death was not just a physical plague. It also unleashed social and economic upheaval upon Europe. The dramatic decrease in population led to a shortage of labor, which in turn gave peasants more power to demand better working conditions and higher wages. This shift in power dynamics weakened the feudal system, which had long dominated European society. Furthermore, the plague's devastating impact on rural communities led to the growth of cities as people sought new opportunities and a fresh start. So in the aftermath of this terrible plague, new opportunities and changes began to appear. However, it would take centuries for Europe to recover fully from the devastation wrought by the plague. The rapid onset and spread of the disease overwhelmed the limited medical knowledge and resources of the time. People desperately sought cures and preventative measures, but the effectiveness of these efforts was often questionable. Some turned to religious figures for help, seeking blessings and miracles to ward off the disease. Others experimented with isolation and quarantine measures, though they were not always successful in containing the spread of the plague. All right, folks, we hope you enjoyed this chilling journey through history's most infamous plague. If you want to learn more about other historical plagues, let us know in the comments. Until then, stay healthy and stay tuned for more epic tales from the past.